Welcome everybody to this week's call. This week we're going to talk about a quasi-controversial topic in current events right now, which is mask wearing as related to the COVID-19 pandemic, as some call it. But we want to start with the disclaimer that, of course, before implementing anything on this call, you want to speak with your primary care provider. Things are accurate to the best of our ability at the time of the call. If you're watching this in the future, then check for accuracy at that future date. So masks. Masks are a controversial topic because the mainstream media is promoting that you need to wear them. But as you'll learn today, if you actually look at the science, science would suggest that you should not wear them. So what do? Do I listen to Costco when they tell me I can't come in unless I have a mask on? Or do I just go to Costco and say, no, thank you, when they offer me the mask? Because you can do that if you weren't aware. So let's just try and keep it non-political and just use the science. So there's this concept of what's called pH in your body. And your blood pH is finally modulated between 7.35 and 7.45. What does that mean? Well, pH is how acidic or how basic, or how, another word for basic is alkaline, is your tissue environment. And in the case of blood, you want it between 7.35 to 7.45, which is slightly net alkaline. Totally neutral pH is a 7. The most acidic is below 7, all the way down to 1 and 0. The most alkaline is all the way up to 14. So in your blood, it should be 7.35 to 7.45. It's tightly regulated. If you go above or below one of those numbers, you're not going to live very long. So in your body, you have 3 buffering systems to make sure your pH, the pH of your blood, is regulated between that tight window. So it's a very, very important fundamental part of your physiology. And if you skew it one way or the other, issues occur rather quickly. This is important because mask wearing can impact your pH. The viewers out there may be familiar with hyperventilation, right? If you've ever hyperventilated and you went to the ER, or someone had some EMT knowledge or training, they may have given you a brown paper bag to breathe into, right? Because if you're hyperventilating, you are actually lacking CO2, okay? And so breathing into the brown paper bag is called CO2 rebreathing, and you're acidifying your blood because you are net too alkaline. And so rebreathing in the bag is acidifying your blood and bringing you back to pH balance. Okay, so in the case where you're too alkaline, acidifying the blood until you're back to balance is a good thing. But if you put on a mask and you start with normal pH, if you put on a mask and you're CO2 rebreathing and you're not hyperventilating, now you're driving a net acidity to your pH and to your blood gases. So what might that do to us physiologically? Well, here's a paper from 2016 called Central Respiratory Chemosensitivity and Cerebrovascular CO2 Reactivity, a rebreathing demonstration illustrating integrative human physiology. So that's a mouthful. But basically, this paper is looking at CO2 rebreathing and what it does to the blood gases and how that impacts blood flow in the brain. And so there's a cool little diagram down here. And what this diagram shows us is that if you're hypercapnic, which is a fancy word for the partial pressure of CO2 in your blood is too high, so you're too acidic, what happens in the brain reflexively is the cerebral blood flow, the vessels dilate because they're decreasing the resistance of blood flow. They want more blood flow to get there quicker to flush out the CO2 or carry it away. Because if the CO2 stays there, you stay acidic. Well, what could that result in symptomatically? Good question. Let me see. So from a symptom standpoint, you can see on Healthline symptoms of Too much CO2 rebreathing could drive fatigue, could drive an inability to concentrate or think clearly, could drive headaches or flushing or dizziness, shortness of breath, rapid breathing, increased blood pressure. An easier way to maybe see this would be this diagram here off of Wikipedia. And basically, carbon dioxide toxicity could impact your vision, could impact your hearing, could lead to drowsiness, dizziness, confusion, headache. So all of those things are neurologic symptoms, right? Vision, hearing, cognition may lead to shortness of breath. Like we said, you might have increased sweating, increased heart rate, blood pressure, maybe muscular tremors. So obviously carbon dioxide toxicity is the end range of being way too acidic with it. But what about these subtle increases in acidity occurring from wearing a mask for 8 hours straight? In a healthy person, or I should say even in a healthy person, you could start to develop some of these issues. And in someone that already has oxygenation issues, this may be a bigger deal. Because as the study shows that we were just looking at, you'll see that changes in both arterial and tissue partial pressure of carbon dioxide and oxygen elicit changes in arterial diameter. So constriction and dilation. And we saw above that when there's too much CO2, blood vessels dilate to hopefully wash it away and bring in oxygenated blood quickly. Well, you can see specifically hypoxia, which means reduced oxygen, and hypercapnia, or too much CO2, both elicit dilation, increasing the diameter to bring more blood. But what's interesting is that hypoxia is what happens when you have iron deficiency or when you're not delivering oxygen for any reason. Okay, it might be oxygen deficiency or iron deficiency. Why does that matter? Well, iron carries oxygen. Oxygen becomes energy, right? Or if you have poor circulation for any reason or poor oxygenation because of pulmonary issues, hypoxia can be a result of that. The hypercapnia, if you're wearing a mask and CO2 rebreathing, both of these things can lead to issues where you have cognitive changes as seen on this diagram. Hypoxia is also pro-inflammatory. So if you're not providing enough oxygen to the body, just like if I choked you, if I held on long enough, you may tap out or start to fight back. Well, if you're not delivering oxygen to the cells or you're delivering too much CO2 to the cells, that can be like choking your cells as well. So setting off an inflammatory response. So the CO2 rebreathing becomes an issue with the masks. What does the research say about the mask wearing? You might say, oh, that's nice, but is that really happening? There's been multiple nurses and doctors that I know that have sounded the alarm bell about this. And there's been studies across the board looking at this. Here's one from 2015 in the British Medical Journal. The first randomized controlled trial of cloth masks compared to medical masks in healthcare workers. And their conclusions were that this study is the first RCT of cloth masks, and the results caution against use of cloth masks, because of moisture retention, reuse of cloth masks, and poor filtration may result in increased risk of infection. What? I thought we were wearing masks to prevent infection. Well, cloth masks in this gold standard RCT trial found that they may increase your risk of infection. Cloth masks should not be recommended for healthcare workers, particularly in high-risk situations. So another reason for not wearing cloth masks is because they're not fitted to your face. So when you see the N95 masks that healthcare workers wear, they're specifically fitted to the face so that they're tight and sealed so that air and molecules and say viruses, bacteria, those things aren't getting in or out on the sides of the mask. When you put on a cloth mask, the sides are usually bowed out like this. There's space between the nose and the cheek, and air can enter and leave through those areas. So a virus, a little virion, is so tiny that you can have enough infectious content of virus in one aerosolized droplet, that if it sneaks out the side or the top of the mask, that mask was useless. So people are still at risk of being infected, plus you're at risk of CO2 rebreathing and those symptoms associated with it. And then the N95 masks that the healthcare workers wear, those were developed to stop bacteria, specifically TB. And bacteria are thousands of times larger than viruses. So even those have been shown not to stop virus. And that can be seen in this great article that was put together by a PhD listed here, where he goes through the science on masks, and he lists each citation of each study and the major findings. So this study looked at the N95 masks for healthcare workers, and healthcare workers who wore them were significantly more likely to experience headaches. Well, why? The CO2 rebreathing. Does CO2 rebreathing cause headaches? That's one potential symptom, okay, of hypercapnia. So there's lots of studies that he cites in here just saying face masks to prevent transmission of flu. None of the studies reviewed showed a benefit from wearing a mask in either healthcare workers or community members in households to stop flu. And influenza virus, coronaviruses are related. They are different, but they're not massively different from each other. This next study, there were a systematic review of 17 studies. None of the studies established a conclusive relationship between mask, respirator use, and protection against flu. In this meta-analysis, we found no significant difference between N95 masks and surgical masks in associated risk of respiratory infection, flu-like virus, and workplace absenteeism. So a flu-like virus could be coronavirus. Obviously, the study was done before SARS-CoV-2 hit the scene, but it's an influenza-like virus, and on and on. So the guy goes down citing different studies saying they're not useful. And then lastly, we have this put out in the Lancet in March, talking about masks for the COVID pandemic, and specifically for the United States. The CDC did not recommend people wear a mask if they're well, and the US Surgeon General urged people to stop buying masks. And even the WHO said if you are healthy, you shouldn't wear a mask unless you're caring for someone with a SARS-CoV-2 infection. So if we look at the evidence suggests that wearing a mask is more likely to hurt you than be helpful, and more likely to result in increasing your risk of infection versus helping prevent the infection. So what do we do? Well, we need to do what we've talked about a million times, principles over pandemic, right? If you're looking to improve immune system and antiviral defenses, vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, selenium, have vitamin A, have piles and piles of research behind them. Actually oxygenating well so that you have an optimal pH balance is going to promote a healthy immune system. Getting out in nature, not sequestering yourself in your home, grounding, healthy food, healthy sleep, all of these different things. So this is the topic for today, and I'll open it up for any questions or comments.
Is it just me?
Right now, yeah.
Okay. As always, I often need to digest it. I'd like to read that last article myself.
Sure.
And clearly there's a lot of good peer-reviewed scientific studies that more than suggest, obviously clearly show that it's what most people are doing is at best not necessary, and at worst perhaps harmful if they're wearing it all day long. Mm-hmm. And obviously it begs the question of why is everybody so confused? Why is there so much information that's counter to that? Even I'm kind of musing rather than making more of a comment than a question. I know a number of healthcare professionals who are not politicized and are well trained, mm-hmm. albeit conventionally well trained, mm-hmm. and they're all in the camp of needing and wanting masks. Mm-hmm. So that's an interesting phenomenon, So I guess that's a comment. So I know. Let me think. A good dozen people, younger, they're under 30, And they're all well-trained PAs and that sort of thing, not physicians, a couple of physicians who are about my age. And they're all in the quadrant of, we need masks when we work.
Mhm.
They work
Yeah.
in New York, by the way. That's probably at least a factor.
Yep. Yep. So there's multiple factors. If they're employed by a big hospital, um, they're probably pressured into that. So for example, um, this isn't a big hospital, but I went to Bank of America today, and there's a lady who I was depositing a check, so she had an iPad. She's like, "Hey, I can just deposit your check right here." And she had a mask on but no gloves, so she took my check from me, and she took my card from me so she could punch
Yeah.
it over to open my account. And I said, "Well, how helpful is that mask if you're touching my card and picking up my germs?" And she said, "Well, I'm just wearing the mask because they want me to. They told me to wear gloves, but I lied and said I was allergic because I didn't want to wear them." And I was like, this is the crazy town we live in. You know what I mean? Like, so as far as New York goes, well, New York's the epicenter of death, right? So the propaganda is even thicker in New York than anywhere else. But again, if you're going by the science, we have the science right here. So I would be a quack in New York. People would say, "What? People are dying. What are you talking about?" Well, um, the people are dying in New York with people wearing masks. People are dying in New York with people wearing gloves. People are dying in New York with a lockdown. There's a reason for it other than the masks. And so the problem with your friends or the people is that they're probably in a system that is mandating this because that system is part of the larger conventional medical system, which is part of the larger narrative. And so because you'll notice if you go today, I posted an article on Facebook from renowned neurosurgeon Dr. Russell Blaylock, and he wrote an article about masks not being useful and potential dangers of masks. And as I posted it, Facebook immediately said, this is misinformation. See fact check. Do you still want to post it?" And I said yes. And then when you see my post, it's kind of grayed out and says, fact check to be misinformation or whatever. And it's like, well, Dr. Russell Blaylock's a renowned neurosurgeon, has been around forever, written books, and
That's
basically,
really disturbing. That's
yeah,
disturbing.
it is. And so I don't really have an answer for it other than, in my mind, it's kind of like a social experiment to see what can we get people to do, because the and as a chiropractor, the conventional medicine, they love to say, well, where's the evidence base? Where's the evidence base? But now the tables are turned because here's the peer-reviewed evidence base, and it actually goes against what they're saying. And if we actually dig into what the governing bodies are saying, they're saying the same thing in terms of you don't need it if you're healthy. So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's a good exchange. Now, actually, in these particular individuals that I'm discussing, they didn't even have the masks to provide for them. They wanted them to have it, but they didn't have it. They had to scurry to find their own stuff.
Mhm.
In my own mind, it's surprising that more true information, actual research isn't well known. I think I understand, as much as I am not happy about I guess it is censored, there's no other word for it, but the
Mhm.
wanting to not have two really big opposing schools of thought, even if in fact that's what our country is really based on, because this is call it a pandemic or not, but the differing of opinion for so many millions of people could cause a tremendous amount of discordant energy and problems way above and beyond the disease.
Oh yeah, far above it. And I mean, I think you're 100% correct, and you need to look no further than Facebook,
Yeah.
right? So I'm obviously, I've been vocal on this whole thing and how essentially since, mid-February, there's been no common sense in anything that's happened related to the COVID picture. And, I'm hearing from people that I've known in my life that I've trained right next to in the gym or that I played college football with that I've never heard say anything negative my entire life. But now that this is happening, they're like, they're they're dedicated to the narrative, and whatever I say about a mask or whatever I say about hydroxychloroquine or anything, they're just spouting what the news said. And it's like, man, the and that's where the fear comes in, is you have a fear response, and so fear is going to ingrain things much more strongly in
Correct.
someone's brain and in their behavior than anything else. So they heard in February, the world's going to die, 3 million Americans are going to die if we don't do this, and out of fear they adopt that story, right? So now
Yep.
to adopt a new story is going to be very hard, because that's what they've anchored to, and it doesn't matter how much you pound them with science, right? The emotional attachment is already to the story, and then people don't like to be wrong either. So
Well, that's right.
so
And trying to keep that that fear factor down is, it seems wrong that it should be government controlled, but I understand it on a microcosm. Okay, so I was a president of a principal at school, and most of the time my teachers got autonomy in their classroom. Sometimes we had to talk about it and we'd come to an agreement together. Once in a great while, for the good of the whole, I made the decision. It may not have been popular, and I didn't want to hear dissent. I didn't want to hear why they didn't want to do it. I didn't want to hear why they disagreed with it. I didn't want them talking about it and creating issues around the community, because that wasn't productive. You know, every once in a great while, I would explain my position. I got to make that decision. I was paid to do that. Didn't happen often. So I kind of liken that to this. This could be mass hysteria, and maybe the decision made and how it was made isn't right. And maybe. Maybe also the idea that there is real truth out there that they're squashing is incredibly wrong. But I kind of understand the greater good of trying to keep the population from hysteria.
mhm.
And if you allow, they can't disallow, and they are disallowing it. I don't understand that, but I'm just trying to get my head around how and why it's happening, because you're not the only one. Dr. Cabral has had his, he talks about how, I don't know if you know Stephen Cabral, he's
Mhm.
great functional doctor, yeah. And he's had his podcasts and his listening audience where they were, oh, I don't know, let's say they were 10,000 people. They kept cutting it down, letting it not appear to
Mhm.
people, so that his listening audience broke down to like 500. So if I was a follower, I wouldn't see that he had anything new out. So he had to stop doing Instagram and stop doing, his podcasts are still, you have to dial in so you can talk about stuff that way. But he's telling the same party line you are, and the other functional docs are doing the same. But
Yep.
it really begs the question of why. And we are in a country that I love, and I'm
Yep.
trying to figure out why. And the best way I can figure it out is understanding it through my own experience.
Yep. And to your point, and like I said earlier, here's can you see my Facebook right now?
I do, yeah.
So here's the Dr. Blaylock post that was censored earlier, and then if you haven't seen it, this is the best video I've seen in the whole coronavirus thing so far, by Dr. Dolores Cahill. She's a PhD immunologist. She has created antibody testing assays. She basically discovered that most of the antibodies the research world was using 20 years ago were all wrong, and created scientific integrity methods to have people go back and do their studies and do them right, or rescind them, or they're going to jail in Europe. And so basically she walks through that, and in this interview talks about the true science and the immunology behind SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19, and it's the best thing I've seen. And she says in the video, there's no point for lockdown, there's no point for masks, there's no point for vaccine. If we're going to quarantine, it should be people essentially 80 and older are the ones who need it, and while they're quarantined, they should be taking vitamin C, vitamin D, and zinc. And it's just awesome. So I post that, hey, everyone watch this, and my wife tries and she gets this video. This video is
Yeah,
unavailable
yeah.
unless you're in restricted mode. Then she puts it on restricted mode, and she says, I still can't access it. So then down here, my friend says, well, click the dots in the upper corner and open it in Safari. Essentially, Facebook's not going to let you watch it, but Safari will. So, Facebook, Instagram's owned by Facebook,
Yep.
YouTube's owned by Google. Like they're doing their best to stop the truth, but it's there.
Yep.
It's just these are the loopholes we need to jump through.
Very alarming. And of course, just because 2, 5, even 10 experts in their field draw their conclusions that through this you shouldn't do that, it's still it still warrants examination of all the experts and their opinions, which I haven't done. I'm not doubting that this is all true, but you
Yeah.
can take any set of facts and take the greatest minds, and they don't necessarily walk away with the same opinions of it.
Right. Right. So back to your point is but America was founded on having access to both sides and both opinions,
Amen.
right? So
Amen.
if you don't give me access to both sides, now I am a sheep. And now all I hear is what you're telling me, and now it's propaganda.
Yes, it
And
is.
and there's no way for me to determine truth because and really actually I saw a post recently that Facebook stopped. I guess they haven't, but Facebook stopped labeling things as misinformation because it made people want to read it more, which makes
Uh,
total sense. It
of
only
course.
validates that it's truth if you're trying to hide it from people reading it,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
there's a lot of other lies that you leave up in
Yeah.
other related topics that, so it's like if you're really about truth, then let us read both sides and make our own decisions on it. Don't censor people, because that's just proving that you have an agenda.
Agreed. And there clearly is. It's the most disturbing thing. I just can't even wrap my head around the fact that's happening.
Yeah, yeah. So we need to keep sharing and keep educating online and in the groups that you're educating and the groups I'm educating. Share as we're finding things, and it's encouraging because I really think people are waking up. In the last week, 2 judges have struck down the lockdown, one in Oregon and one in Wisconsin. I saw a video of a gym in New Jersey yesterday who opened against the rules, and the police were there, and there were about 30 gym members chanting, "Police stand down, police stand down." And the owners of the gym came out and they said, "Hey, let's be respectful." And the police officer said, "Technically, you're all in violation of an executive order, and with that, have a great day." And then they started chanting USA, because the police took an oath to serve and protect the people, not to do the bidding of tyrants, right? So the fact that he did that showed, okay, I did my job. I said what I was supposed to say, but I'm on your side. And so hopefully this snowball will keep rolling downhill here, and we'll get some justice.
I would like to think that there was that much cerebral activity going on in your evaluation of the policeman. I suspect it was more like, what am I going to do with 30 people if I lock
Right.
up, bring them down?
Right.
I don't think there was all that higher level thinking. I think it was like, these guys are doing not much. I'm not taking them down and figuring out what to do with them.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And that's been a thought of mine. Like, if every restaurant opens, what are they going to do? So hopefully there's some sort of massive civil disobedience like that. I know in Maine, there's one county in Maine that just said we're opening up all restaurants, and it's like, come arrest us. There's no space. So you're gonna have to let prisoners out, and that they're doing that too, and that's another nonsensical
Yeah,
thing. But
I know. It's
but the
just
world
another
is waking up.
survival of the fittest that's been happening since the caveman.
Yep. And so that's where we benefit from being as healthy as possible, because we'll survive longer than the rest, ideally.
A quick note of switching over to myself. So I want to tell you that absolutely nasty granular thing that I take